The Heat were looking to keep the momentum from Game 1 going on Wednesday night and face the Bucks without Giannis Antetokounmpo. Instead, they were crushed down to earth by an avalanche of scoring, inside, outside, and everywhere in between, and a blowout loss that exposed many of Miami's weaknesses. What went wrong? And could they make changes that could help in Game 3? We answer that and your questions on a special live playoff episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil, however you might be tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, or live with us right now after the game on YouTube. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. And whoo boy, the Heat blown out by the Bucks. No Giannis. This one was over basically at halftime after the Bucks put up 81 points in that first half. They couldn't miss a three-pointer. Pretty much the inverse of the Heat's Game 1 win, because they couldn't make any three-pointers either. This one was one of the worst losses of the season, or one of the worst losses I've ever seen from the Heat in the playoffs, just generally. Tough to take much away from a game like this, but David, what do you think of this game? How are you feeling after witnessing that?
It was very lopsided, no doubt about that. And I think that's kind of what sticks out the most is that it just felt like Miami had no answer for anything. Even when they started off the third quarter with that 7-0 run to cut the lead to 19, and you're thinking, well, maybe it's manageable. Maybe you can slowly inch your way out of that deficit. Instead, the Bucks just overpowered Miami flat out. There was no answer for anything. Between the combination of Milwaukee's size and shooting ability from the perimeter, Miami had no answers defensively, and offensively, they regressed in a way that probably was a little predictable. At least we talked about this in our preview or of game 2. You hope that you knew they weren't going to shoot 60%, but you could hope that they could at least shoot a little bit better than 20-something%, which they did for most of the game until Duncan Robinson caught fire.
Until the fourth quarter garbage time. Yeah, it was 30% for the first 3 quarters. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I guess I feel okay with it because you win one in Milwaukee, and that's ultimately not the best you could hope for, but it's a pretty good draw. It was a good win in Game 1, a bad loss in Game 2, and now you move forward and hope you can learn from it. And I think that there are some things to take from this, not to mention the changes to the starting lineup, things you could do defensively a little bit differently, and just major tweaks all around. You can't really overturn exactly what got you to this point in the first place, so you can't make sweeping changes. There are no easy answers, no plug and play solution that's going to solve all of Miami's problems. But maybe you could make some minor adjustments and hope for a Game 3 win.
Maybe we'll definitely get into some of the adjustments that they could do heading into Game 3 in Miami in the next segment. But I appreciate the bigger picture perspective here, especially on the heels of that. Look, if you told the Heat, hey, you're going into Milwaukee, you're playing the number 1 seed, you're the number 8 seed after having to play a couple of games in the play-in tournament, not getting much rest, having to travel, and take on the best team in the NBA. You're going to leave Milwaukee with the series split 1-1, and with Giannis having played just 11 minutes in those 2 games and hobbled. His status for Game 3 still up in the air. We don't know how he's going to respond to that lower back injury by Saturday night. So if you would have told the Miami Heat that, I think they take that. 10 times out of 10, right? You take that. The thing that concerns me about this game, though, David, is like, this is the same issue that we've seen from the Miami Heat in the regular season. It's the same team. We could talk about rotations, and we're going to, and there's things that I'm sure the Heat can do and will do differently from this game to the next game. But at the end of the day, the Bucks are deeper. They are better. They could have Giannis coming back sooner rather than later. And the shooting inconsistency with this team, that is the normal for this team, right? I think there's a lot of Heat fans and people out there saying like, well, if they just start shooting the 3-ball consistently, this is what they could do. They're just not gonna. Like, that's the thing. Every team in the league can shoot well from 3-point range in any game. Like the Pistons can go out there and shoot 60% in a game. The difference between good 3-point shooting teams and bad 3-point shooting teams is the good 3-point shooting teams shoot well more often, and the Heat don't do that. They shoot poorly. So in terms of what you do with this game, if it's one that you just sort of crumble up and throw in the recycling bin, I kind of think you almost do that with both games, not just this game, because I think it would be unfair to do that with this game and not do it with the first game, given how well the Heat shot in game one. If we want to go bigger picture trends in the first two games, I think the Bucks defense has gotten the Heat to play exactly the way that they want them to. The 3-point shots are not high quality looks, even though the Heat shot a bunch of good ones in the first game. They only got 25 of them up. And they've basically taken away the paint from everybody other than Jimmy Butler.
Right.
So I think the Bucks are happy to live with how they've defended and how they've played in the first two games. And I think the pressure is squarely on the Miami Heat now going into Saturday's game.
With the exception of obviously having to replace Tyler Hero, do you think Miami made any adjustments in between game 1 and 2? Because I don't think they did anything differently offensively. They were still looking for shots in the soft zone there when Bam had that space early in the game. Brook Lopez, again, by design, giving up that shot to Bam. He wasn't able to capitalize. The 3-point looks were there. Again, as you pointed out, by design. That's something Milwaukee does. And Miami just couldn't knock them down. They just had some occasional ISO attempts from Jimmy, who wasn't passing the ball, looking perhaps a little bit more aggressively at the basket, trying to get his scoring going above all else tonight. And that wasn't nearly effective enough either. He wasn't getting to the line. He wasn't knocking down enough shots, and they just couldn't do anything defensively. And I think that's the bigger problem, is that while their offense really struggled, that's more of the norm. It's the fact that they gave up as many 3-point attempts, and Milwaukee shot an incredibly high rate. Some of those shots were, I can't even say they were difficult. They were just impossible shots. Like with the shot clock winding down, at the end of the half, with Joe Ingles in the corner. Joe Ingles, Pat Connaughton, who didn't even play in game 1, was electric from 3-point range. So there was a lot of hard to predict factors that led to some incredible performances on Milwaukee's side of things. And I think I texted you. I said, no, I don't think Miami early in the game were playing badly. They were playing incredibly well, and Milwaukee was. They were doing everything they had to do. They started with their inside-outside game, and again, I think that's something that we could talk about in the next segment, but their size was just overpowering Miami early on, whether it was Brook Lopez or Drew Holiday, anybody who was getting a mismatch down in the paint. That's why they wound up outscoring Miami by a wide margin and points in the paint, and then that eventually wound up freeing all of Milwaukee's shooters who had a ton of room, and even when they didn't, again, just hitting some ridiculously tough shots.
So I don't know. I look at the effort that the Bucks played with in game 1, and my immediate takeaway was like, okay, the Bucks are just going to play harder in game 2. I thought that their closeouts were lazy. I didn't think that they put a lot of ball pressure on Jimmy Butler or anybody else. And in game 2, they came out, they played way harder. They just played better. And that was unsurprising. I mean, the Bucks are a very good basketball team. I don't think that shouldn't be a surprise whatsoever. I guess what surprised me a little bit was just how flat the Heat came out. And when we get to adjustments, there are some schematic things that they could do, but it felt like the Heat were very happy to just kind of take what it was that the Bucks gave them because it worked in game 1. To your point, like the Heat didn't really make any adjustments going into game 2 other than having to try to find a way to replace Tyler Hero. I think there's some major adjustments that they're going to have to make going into game. Hey, look, that's not normal. That's par for the course, right? Like the team that's up in the series doesn't make the adjustments, and it's the other team that has to come up with the counter punch, and that's what happened. But I think if the same thing I just said about the Heat is like, yeah, you can go into this first two games, you come out of it 1-1, and Giannis hobbled. I also think that the Bucks kind of seeing what they got from the Miami Heat in those first two games, and given that they're up or they're tied 1-1 with Giannis only playing 11 minutes, I think they would take it too, kind of weirdly, right? And I think that they leave Milwaukee feeling better about where this series is going than where Miami is, because Miami, they don't have Tyler Hero, period. The Bucks might be getting Giannis back. That's a big storyline, is just the injuries in this thing. And then, I don't know, the Bucks are the better team. They were always the team with the upper hand in this matchup, right? And I felt like it was always on the Heat, and it is going to be on the Heat to make the adjustments, to play better, and to hit all these other. I know the 3-point shooting was a big story, but like they didn't out-rebound the Bucks. They got beat in the paint too, not just from 3-point range. They didn't create nearly enough turnovers. They were not pressuring the passing lane. Like all that energy that they had in game 1, not there in game 2. And so it's like a holistic approach. Like they got to do everything better. Like all the KPIs that Spo always talks about, they didn't do any of it. None of the key performance indicators. They got none of those things. They got to do all of those things to even have a chance at winning another game in this series. And I don't think that's an overstatement.
No, I think it's pretty square. I look, it's tough from Miami's perspective. They did not come out with the same kind of intensity, sense of urgency, and that's probably much more expected than it should be. Like, this is a team that has been disappointing in that regard all season long. They've been disappointing in many different ways, but I think if you look to everything that's happened, especially in the second half of the season, or at least after the All-Star break, even right before it, they lost key games. They lost key games down the stretch. They lost that game to Atlanta, and there's just never been an understanding from this group that they can turn on the Jets when it matters most. They had the game won. They find out about Giannis right before game 2, and you're thinking, well, you know what? Maybe they come out there with a kind of renewed sense of purpose and urgency and say, you know what? Now's our chance to put our foot down on the throat and try and gain a major advantage, because who knows what will happen when Giannis, if and when Giannis does return in this series. But this was a golden opportunity for Miami, and I didn't see that energy from them at any point in the game. And I know that's demoralizing when Milwaukee is hitting those tough shots, but that doesn't excuse a lot of those lazy passes.
It did feel
really
like
bad turnovers.
Demoralizing is a good word, and it's it felt like that's exactly what happened, though. You're right, and to your point, well said. Not an excuse, right? But it did kind of feel like that, and that's, again, going back to what I said earlier, a theme from the regular season, and something I noticed in this. It just feels like that's what happened in the regular season when they would talk about the lack of transition defense and just the general slippage on that end and rebounding. It's just like, it's really hard when you're Jimmy Butler and you're Bam Adebayo and you're generating all these open looks from 3-point range and your supporting cast just isn't hitting them. It is demoralizing. And these guys are human. And I do, it's inexcusable, but I also get it at the same time, if that makes any sense. But we're going to talk about some of the adjustments that they can make other than being moralized in game 3 next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know if the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, find us later this week. We'll have our guest Rohan Nadkarni on to talk about the series going back to Miami. So this one, game 2, pretty much same game plan as game 1. The Bucks' big adjustment, I think, was just playing better. Like I said before, now the pressure goes to the Miami Heat. What do we think the Heat can do differently in game 3, David?
I think it starts off on the defensive end, as I mentioned before. I don't think they can do anything offensively really to change things around. But if I were to make an offensive tweak, and I guess I'll start that because I think it's much more simple, and I think I don't know if it's likely to happen. I'd go to Bam Adebayo less in the first quarter. I think that's by design. I think Spo was looking to get Bam going early. It seemed like he took a lot of his shot attempts early in that first quarter, wasn't hitting those. And I don't know if it was by virtue, I'd have to rewatch it, but I don't know if it was by virtue of them locking down Max and Duncan on the perimeter and not really many opportunities elsewhere other than for Bam. But I think Bam also took a lot of those shots earlier in the shot clock. And so I think he was trying to get his offense going. I thought that he'd be able to carry over that momentum from the second half of game 1 into today's game. That was not the case. Eventually, some of those shots did fall. He did recognize the lack of foot speed on Brook Lopez's part and took advantage of that on some occasions. Not nearly enough and not nearly consistent enough. But I don't think it works. I think it stagnates the offense to a degree, just going into Bam. I'd rather see much more ball movement leading to an open 3-point shot because I think that's the key. Again, too few 3-point attempts, and you're not hitting them at nearly enough of a percentage in order to make a difference. And then even later on the game, when they were clicking offensively to some degree, and again, it's all by degrees, I think they were still answering all of Milwaukee's threes with 2s of their own because that's what they had available to them, and that wasn't good enough.
No, it wasn't. Back to the Bam point, though. I actually liked his game overall. Five of his 9 makes were at the basket. And I thought that was going to be a big adjustment going into game 2, is not just taking what the drop defense of Milwaukee is going to give him, which is like that 15-foot, 12-foot free throw line kind of jumper. They needed to do a better job getting right to the basket, and then that sort of creates those opportunities to kick out. He only had 1 assist in the game. I don't know off the top of my head how many times I saw him actually kick out, but it was definitely more than once. It was just none of his teammates were making any of those shots.
Sure.
Also, credit to Milwaukee, though. They played the passing lanes. They took away those kickouts and stuff like that. Like, the Bucks defense played great. The Heat missed a bunch of shots that they usually make too, or I shouldn't say usually, did make in game 1, and maybe are sometimes every other day capable of making. So I didn't have so much of a problem. I actually think Bam needs to do more. I think.
Well, he was 2 of 6 in the first quarter, and then 4 of 6 in the second quarter. So, and then of course he played in the third, not in the fourth. So I think you wind up seeing the final tally, and that's fine. It seemed like the offense was so purposefully going to Bam to see if they could get him going, and it didn't work, and it led to a lot of rebound opportunities for Lopez, and then a transition basket for the Bucks, etc. So it didn't seem like there was a set offense other than, well, Bam's in that soft zone.
It was sort of one. Yeah, it was sort of your turn, my turn. Like, hey, Jimmy had Drew Holiday on him, so Jimmy runs around, tries to get Drew off. It was sometimes one possession would be Jimmy doing that, or sort of mismatch hunting, trying to get Brook Lopez on him, and another possession would be Bam. I didn't see a whole lot of their pick and roll together either. I would like to see more of that turning into those open opportunities for Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and Duncan Robinson, and whoever else on the perimeter. And so to your point, yeah, but I thought the Bucks flattened him out a little bit and then got them into that. Drew Holiday just starting the game on Jimmy Butler, I don't think that was a big deal, right? And we talked about the Athletics player survey the other day, and one of the things from that was overwhelmingly everybody said the best defender in the NBA and most underrated defender in the NBA was Drew Holiday. And you watch games like this and you get why. Like, Jimmy still got his points. He ended up with 25 points on 12 shots, and he found ways to get open. That was mostly when he got Drew Holiday off of him, right? And there's not a lot of guys who could do that. Jimmy Butler is big, strong, fast enough and smart enough to do it. There's a lot of guys who can't do that to Drew Holiday. He just sticks with them. So I thought it mucked up their offense. And if Jimmy has to spend valuable parts of the shot clock just getting this guy off of him, that does kind of turn things around, and it does hurt them offensively, and it does slow them down. It does take them out of, I think, some of the sets that they wanted to get to. So I don't know. I don't really know. I thought the loss of Tyler Hero was very evident in this one. You don't have that other shot creator. Gabe Vincent tried to do a little bit. He was really the only guy outside of the fourth quarter that put up double-digit points. He ended up with 16 points. I don't count the Duncan Robinson and Victor Oladipo fourth quarter. Yeah, and so but I just don't know how much you can expect from these other guys, especially considering how inconsistent the shooting has been. It kind of feels like it has to be Bam and Jimmy just having dominant takeover games, like Bam Adebayo having literally the best offensive series of his career, and Jimmy Butler going full-blown Eastern Conference Finals last year. That is the only way the Heat can come out of this series with multiple wins, let alone winning the series. But I don't know.
They don't have a third best player right now, and so you don't know who it's going to be. It could be Max. We've seen him have a big game. We've seen Kyle do it against the Atlanta Hawks in the play-in tournament. It's very unlikely that either of them goes off, considering how good Milwaukee's defense is. So I don't know. I think offensively, there's not much you can do. I think you stick with your plan, try to get them going, a little bit more ball movement, maybe a little bit more off ball cutting from some guys. But
better
Milwaukee's
screens,
defense,
just
better screens,
better screen setting. You're right.
The ball better control the ball.
It feels like almost like what the Bucks had to do from game 1 to game 2. Sometimes the best adjustment you can have is just play better, play harder. Play with more effort, play with more
intent,
impact.
as Will likes to say, more intent.
Sure.
Defensively,
yes, there we go.
Okay.
Create more turnovers. That's the main thing.
That is definitely it. I think part of the problem, look, you and I both thought Duncan Robinson would start. It seemed pretty evident that was going to be the case. I am, call me crazy, I think Haywood Highsmith deserves a chance to start. And I hate that we've gone to this point in the program, but it just feels like you've got to try something. But Miami's defense, with their switch heavy base isn't working when Brook Lopez is basically being guarded by either Max Strus or Gabe Vincent or Kyle Lowry or anybody. There's not a lot of size on this Heat roster, not a lot of options. But I think at least with Highsmith, you've got another versatile enough defender who you can pick up somebody on the perimeter so that you don't have to switch Bam off as much. and he could stick to Lopez a little bit, because I think, again, that inside out game wound up being so effective. Lopez was so dominant early in the first quarter that they were basically scrambling to make sure they could limit his opportunities at the rim. And then that led to wide open 3-point shots for everybody on this Bucks roster, and they were all hitting. So I think you've got to do something a little differently where you can't switch as much. That small ball lineup is being killed. They don't shoot the ball particularly well, so you're not going to match offense for offense, and at least have somebody on there who's a plus defender. With Max and Duncan, you've got 2 negative defenders, so at least put Highsmith in the game. Strus is likely to keep his starting spot over Duncan. I think that's pretty clear.
Sure.
And I don't think you can put Caleb Martin or anybody else in there to replace what Strus can do, at least in theory. He did not do it tonight. But at least with Highsmith, you've got a guy who can handle the ball, who could switch. You feel comfortable leaving him on the perimeter. Too many possessions where it was Brook Lopez being guarded by Max Strus 5 feet away from the basket, and Bam out there kind of just standing in front of Chris Middleton, who didn't have the ball in his hands, and it didn't matter anyway. And that takes away your biggest and best defender.
The Max Strus on Brook Lopez thing was definitely an issue. The Bucks, they recognized it right away. The first play of the first offensive play of the game for them was just get it to Brook Lopez, who got Max Strus pinned down low and just shot right over him. So, can you just put Bam on Brook Lopez? What does that do with Bobby Portis? Is Bobby Portis one of those kinds of guys where you're like, just let Bobby Portis beat us kind of guy? Like, let him get his points? Because he kind of feels like one of those guys. I think he's been really impactful. I actually very much like Bobby Portis. But I would. But you don't like Bobby Portis?
No, I hate Bobby Portis.
Why do you hate
Kevin Garnett? Yeah, no, Bobby Portis. I hate that faux energy that he brings and everything else like that. I am not a Bobby Portis fan. Never have been.
Bobby Portis. I did a
story. No, you talked to him.
I
wrote about him for 6th man of the year. I get it.
Whatever. I like him as a basketball player too. I think he's been good for them. He's obviously helpful. 6th man of the year candidate this year. But I would rather him beat you than Brook Lopez beat you. And you don't want Brook Lopez to kind of gain momentum either, where it kind of feels like Bobby Portis is momentum prone, for better or worse. He just sort of
let him get caught up in the moment and pick up another tee. And
exactly. So maybe you just have Bam start on Brook Lopez, and you kind of get rid of this cutesy, like, we're not worried about you, Brook. We're going to put Max Strus on you, kind of challenge matchup there. I don't know that Highsmith is the answer. I don't know.
There's no.
I know we do have questions about it on the other side of this, but I think Kevin Love could be an option. But what I just can't understand is, if you were going to start Duncan Robinson, why didn't you get the ball to Duncan Robinson more? And Duncan is definitely part of the blame here, because he was not aggressive, but he was running around. He was trying to find openings, and there was a lot of times where the Heat just didn't get him the ball. And in his first 6-minute stint, he did not take a single 3-pointer, and he got 2 fouls. One of the fouls was him trying to get a loose ball, so I don't count that one. One was like just a bad classic Duncan Robinson defensive foul. But they're all terrible. He always gets called for him, and that's just the thing against him. But he gets shoved back into the doghouse by Spo so quickly. He only played that first 6.5-minute stint, and then that was it for the first half, and the game was over.
More confidence, right?
Yeah. And so when he is out there, it just feels like there's no rhythm, there's no chemistry anymore with him and any of his teammates, because his teammates are just not getting him the ball. There was one play, I think it was like in the first 2 minutes of the game, where he's working his tail off trying to get an opening, running around screens, doing this, going from one side of the court to the other, and Max Strus is just standing in the corner, and Duncan Robinson's doing all this work. And I think was it Gabe or Jimmy looked him off and then just passed it to Max, and Max ended up hitting the 3 from the corner. But it's like, if you're Duncan Robinson, you're like, hey, I'm doing all the work.
You're just a decoy out there,
yeah, exactly. And look, if that was the plan, that was the plan. But then why bench him after 6 minutes, and then why start him? Like, I just don't understand. Like, you knew, like, people are, and I tweeted this, and people are like, well, he's terrible defensively. What, you think that's news to Erik Spoelstra? That's why he's been on the bench all season. He knows he's bad defensively. That was not going to be a surprise. Like, what would have been surprising is if Duncan Robinson came out tonight and was all of a sudden awesome defensively. That would have been surprising. But understanding that that's the case going in, that's why I don't understand why the leash was so short with him, because you already knew that. And so if that was your game plan, then just write out your game plan. Mike Budenholzer gets a lot of people blame him a lot for not making adjustments. But the other side of that is that he does stick with his dudes, and he does stick with his game plan, and he trusts the numbers, and he trusts his this is not necessarily being critical of Erik Spoelstra. I guess I just don't get it. Like, if you were going to start him, why not give him the room to actually make an impact? It never felt like he had a chance tonight.
Put him in an opportunity. There was not a lot of looks for him. Like you said, not a shot attempt in that first 6-minute stretch. Yeah, I think he just gets frustrated. Spo just loves to see defensive effort more than anything else. Like, he doesn't even have to be great defense because, Max wouldn't be starting otherwise. It's just about showing effort, and Duncan, he just doesn't show it. And then on offense, he kind of just tends to,
He's like the
be
new
less
Dwayne Dedman.
impactful.
It's just like within him, like one bad mistake, and it's just
Yeah,
he's lost the trust of Erik Spoelstra, to your point, and it's
absolutely.
unfortunate because the guy's
And he's
still under
lost any
contract,
confidence too.
and he's lost all confidence, and so it is.
That's even
It
worse.
feels like these are the kinds of games where he can go. If you're going to tilt offense and do all these things,
Yeah.
he seems like a good guy to have out there, and so that's why everybody kind of expected him to start. I don't know that that's going to be the case in Game 3. That's what we're going to talk about next here on Locked On Heat. Locked On Heat is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please do subscribe. And thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, you can find us on Friday morning with a guest, Rohan Nadkarni from Sports Illustrated, Heat fan, awesome at covering the league. You're going to want to get his perspective on where this series stands going back to Miami for Saturday's Game 3. So let's take some questions from the viewers who are here in the live chat. Before we get to that, though, we do have some questions that came in via Twitter using that hashtag AskLOHeat. Eric writes in, the Duncan Robinson experiment is over. Who should start for the Heat in Game 3 instead? What do you think, David?
I like I said, I think it's Highsmith. I think he provides a little bit more size. I could see the Kevin Love option being not a bad one because again, you're not gonna you have to change your base defense. You can't go switch. You go more zone to start off, or at least have him directly on more man and just stick with him. I know you don't force a switch and invariably, and Love has to do what he can, but maybe that'll give Bam or somebody else time to recover. If you have another big on there, you just cannot have those size mismatches. And I don't look at any of the other options of Miami's roster, neither Omer Yurtseven nor Cody Zeller, and think that they're capable enough in either aspect, defensively or offensively, to offset what Milwaukee does well. So I think you need to you have to have a really good defender in Highsmith who can change things in your favor, or you can have at least a plus scorer in Kevin Love who can stretch the floor, pull Brook Lopez away from the paint, etc. He didn't shoot well today. He didn't really get many opportunities either, but we saw him be really impactful in Game 1, and I thought he was going to be an X factor moving forward. That was not the case tonight. But if you're going to put any option in there over Duncan Robinson, it has to be somebody who's a plus on one side of the ball or the other. Cody Zeller is fine offensively and he's fine defensively. It's just not good enough. And Omer Yurtseven, I think, is too unproven and too slow-footed. He's not going to make the recovery. Look, nobody is more in favor of Yurtseven taking a leap than the two hosts of this podcast. And at the same time, like, he is not going to get any playing time. And I don't think that's on Erik Spoelstra. I think he's just seen,
He's
like
not
we've
ready.
seen, he's not ready. He's not ready
He's
right
barely
now.
played this year.
He's lost 80% of the season.
Yeah.
This is the worst situation to throw him in.
For sure. Look, I don't think Duncan Robinson starts. I think we've basically seen how Erik Spoelstra feels about that. This kind of felt like the last chance for Duncan Robinson, and for whatever reason, he didn't like what he saw, and then that was it. He went with Victor Oladipo quite a bit. That could be telling. Does he go with Oladipo to start games? If you talk about what the Heat need to do in terms of creating turnovers and all those things, that is what Victor Oladipo provides. Offensively, he's so erratic, but I almost wonder if this series is sort of kind of going in the direction of, well, maybe erratic is what this offense needs. It's just sort of this like wild card bull in a China. Just throw chaos and variance into the mix and just sort of see what happens. And maybe Oladipo wins you a game with a random 35-point, 6 for 8 from 3-point range performance. Like, I don't know. It's not a bad idea. In terms of the other options, like you mentioned, Haywood Highsmith, there's some people that have written in Haywood Highsmith should start. Caleb Martin is obviously an option too. He kind of gives you the most balanced, like defensively, he's there. Offensively, he's under control and can make threes. I do wonder if they go to that and maybe bring Haywood Highsmith more into the rotation off the bench. That's an option.
You need to pressure ball handlers and perimeter shooters more, because you can't have those mismatches with Lopez in the first quarter.
So then let's do this. Is it time for Kevin Love to go back into the starting lineup? Because when these teams did play in the regular season, the last time, Kevin Love was on the team and starting. And Kevin Love had the Brook Lopez assignment to start the game, and Bam Adebayo was off of Brook Lopez. And if Giannis is back in game 3, Bam can obviously defend Giannis the way that he was defending him in the first 11 minutes of game 1. Maybe that's an option. And if Duncan Robinson's not even going to get shots in the first place, Kevin Love still spaces the floor, right? Like players that respect Kevin Love, he's a future Hall of Famer. They respect him from 3-point range, even if that shot has not gone in as much as the Heat would like since he got to Miami. So maybe Kevin Love is the answer. It does break up that bench unit a little bit, but then I would counter, I thought Cody Zeller was pretty good. People are asking us, why aren't we seeing more Cody Zeller? I don't know about pairing Zeller with Bam. I would rather go Kevin Love with Bam Adebayo, Bam on Giannis if Giannis plays, Love on Brook Lopez just to provide some size interference. And then you get Cody Zeller coming in off the bench, and Cody Zeller can play with Love. He could play in the small ball lineups and provide some size in this matchup that I think the Heat might need. It takes you away from that sort of narrow path to victory that we've talked about going into the series, which is just out shooting the Bucks. But if you've already kind of moved on from that, if you've already moved on from that strategy, then this is the next logical strategy.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I don't know. I wonder whether or not Love can move well enough to contain Lopez. He has to do a pretty admirable job. That's asking a lot from him, but I think he's also ready for the challenge too. I don't mind it. It's probably my second preferred option behind Highsmith, but you need somebody with size out there. I think Martin will be exposed if you get those switches. Like, you're not going to be able to contain Brook Lopez. It's just all about the player who has the best or who can guard Lopez the most effectively is either Bam or Kevin Love. I don't think Cody Zeller can do it either. I guess he's a big enough body to kind of match up there. So that's somebody else that you can throw in down the road if Love gets into foul trouble or if his 3-point shot isn't falling or something like that. So that is another option. It's just not a very good one. Again, you're not getting any kind of offensive production from a player like Zeller. You hope at least that Love is hitting a 3-point shot so he can be a floor spacer and provide the kind of impact that he did in game 1. I don't know. There's just
maybe
no
it's
option.
Highsmith off the bench and you start Love and Bam and then you stagger them after that. So you have one of them on the court. Love could play backup center minutes after that. I don't know.
You just can't give up the wide open looks that Milwaukee was getting, and so much of that was based off of like they didn't go zone at all today, right? I don't think they went zone. They were just so overmatched defensively. They just never got back in transition, and then it didn't take long for Milwaukee to create a mismatch or a wide open look from 3-point range. It's just
they came out flat. I mean, you
have to erase it. You have to get.
You can talk about all these adjustments and all these things. At the end of the day, they have to play better. Like, they just have to play better. They have to close out better. They have to play better transition defense. And these were issues at the end of the regular season that we talked about. Like, the transition defense wasn't there. The boxing out wasn't there and all these other things. So in terms of game 3 adjustments, box out better. You got to do all those other things. You got to rebound the ball. You got to try to create turnovers. You got to do all these other things.
Was this an issue here? I don't know.
There was a video. He was sort of rubbing his knee and kind of getting underneath his the knee pad that he always wears anyway. So maybe it was bothering him a little bit. He didn't play the whole fourth quarter. I'm not worried about it because I don't have a reason other than a snippet of video to be worried about it. But yeah, I suppose it's something to think about when we open up the injury report tomorrow.
2 days off and before Saturday's game. It's still a night game. So you've got 2.5 days basically to rest and recover. They'll fly back tonight, I would imagine. And then they'll have a couple of days of rest and recovery and to renew, find a renewed sense of purpose because they certainly lost it in game 2.
Last thing. If they're going to play Duncan, shouldn't they take more shots? They should run more DHOs. I would have liked to see more DHOs. So absolutely, I agree.
It felt really stagnant too. Like he said he was running around on some of possessions, but they just weren't moving the ball well. And look, credit to Milwaukee.
Aimlessly,
man.
He was doing his best, but he was sort of just like over here, like he was just sort of a satellite on Miami's offense, just sort of doing random stuff, and they weren't looking for him. They just weren't looking for him, and just no Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo pick and roll, very little of it. Like they got flattened out. The Bucks basically stopped their offense from doing what it wanted to do, and the Heat, they just need to be more forceful in getting into what they want. They got to do it earlier in the shot clock. They got to do their homework early in that shot clock. They got to get out in transition. They got to box out. They got to do all these things. At the end of the day, the Bucks are the better team, right? It's the Heat. They're the team fighting uphill right now. The Bucks have the advantage, and they should because they're the better team. And they potentially
Miami's lost their best scorer. You know, that's That's a huge factor.
Yep.
We thought they might be able to make up for
Yep.
it with a combination of players, but he's your best bucket getter. He might not lead your team in scoring, but so
And
much
this
of what Jimmy does is from the free throw line too. But it's just
And this is
he's your
it's not a deep and versatile team to begin with. So when you lose a player that important, everybody having to step up, it just sets everybody up for failure, right? I mean,
yeah.
that was sort of the story of the regular season anyways, that these guys were being set up for failure because there was too much being asked of them when this team was even healthy, right? And so when Tyler goes down, it makes it that much harder on them.
Can we talk about this? Because look, I hate to stretch the show out even further. A lot of people pointing at Spo and saying he's to blame. I know
don't know.
that's pretty regular, but I don't know what it is that Spo could do given the roster that he has.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about all these rotation things. It's like I say this all the time, but it's not like Kevin Durant is sitting on the bench and Spo is just choosing not to play him. There's just not there. I don't know what the
Jamal
option.
Cain is pretty good though. I don't know.
I just don't like. You could talk about, well, you play Kevin Love here and you play Haywood Highsmith over there, and then maybe you're doing this with Duncan Robinson or this with Max Strus or this with. It's like these are the same players. He's still dealing with the same locker room at the end of the day, and this team isn't talented enough. So I don't think that we're blaming the players. I don't think that we're blaming the coach. I don't think we're even blaming the front office right now. I just think that this team is not as good as the team that they're playing. And that's just the way it is. And they shot 60% in game one. They caught a break going into game two, and they had an opportunity to go up 2-1 in the series. And then the Bucks had the crazy game one shooting game that the Heat had, and then they lose this game. And sometimes that's just the draw. And that's just like the variance and the weird stuff that happens in a make or miss league. If the Bucks don't come out and shoot crazy lights out from 3-point range in this game, maybe the Heat do manage to steal game two. It does get played in the mud, and they do end up getting this game, and they go back to Miami, and maybe they still lose the series. I have no idea, but it was just, I don't think that Spo can do more with this team. I think it's a minor miracle that this team is even in the playoffs, given the lack of talent after their top 2 or 3 guys. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Milwaukee shot 65% from three in the third quarter, 9 of 14. That's like you're mounting a comeback, and Grayson Allen hits 2 threes in a row, and then Joe Ingles catches fire. It was nonstop. There was no way for Miami to recover whatever momentum they were able to build. Yeah, it was.
They stopped playing, and they really did stop playing defense. Like it was like,
yeah,
whatever.
Yeah,
and I don't blame them. The game was over. All right. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Everydayers, find us on Friday with Rohan Nadkarni from Sports Illustrated to get his take on the series going back to Miami and our thoughts after we get a little bit of time to zoom out and think about it all and digest. Yeah, that'll do it for us tonight. Go Panthers, David.
Oh, yeah. Go Cats.
Beat Boston. Yeah.